Let's talk about movement. And I know the last thing you need right now is another person on the internet telling you it's good for you to move, so you should work out today. That's not what I'm here to tell you. I'm here to talk about some of the cooler things about movement, other than the fact that it just helps you look better, in your opinion. And ultimately, if you're somebody who kind of struggles to implement a movement routine or a practice into your life, chances are the way you're approaching movement makes it an unsustainable habit to maintain. And so the reason why is because your relationship to movement is probably what I would call an outside in relationship. By that I mean you're telling yourself you should move because it is good for you, rather than having this embodied relationship to movement, and that relationship providing the power and the will to engage with it as often as you like. Maybe once a day, maybe a couple times a day, maybe once every other day, whatever. Your relationship to movement essentially determines how sustainable your practice of it can and will be. And so in this video, what I hope to talk about are the components of movement that can help you build a relationship to it that's actually more sustainable and life-giving, life-nourishing than perhaps just a relationship to movement that is sort of objective. Like you want to receive the physique that comes with moving. That's totally valid and you're allowed to have that. And I just find that it's going to be more sustainable, more of a lifelong practice if movement is sourced and fueled by our sustainable relationship to it and our bodies. And so let's get into some of these things about movement that can help us build a more sustainable relationship with it. And so oftentimes when we think about movement, we think it has to look a certain way. I use the word movement very intentionally. I use movement over exercise. And I think for me, the reason why is because exercise has a certain tone to it and movement has another tone to it. I don't necessarily think one is better than the other. And I prefer movement in conversation because movement is sort of generic, whereas exercise can imply we're going to the gym or following a routine, and those things are totally fine and also movement. But if our relationship to movement is that it has to look like exercise, I think for those of us who don't currently vigorously exercise or exercise at all, the idea of stepping into something like that, there's already a lot of inertia and resistance in the way. Whereas if I invite you to move, as in just get up and maybe walk around your house a couple times or do a few gentle stretches, the inertia is way smaller because you can see yourself doing that, and that feels a lot more achievable. And when it comes to integrating a new practice into our lives, I really do see a lot of benefit in making something more accessible at first and then ramping up the intensity. And so when you think of movement, try and really hear it for what it is, the moving of the body, not exercise, not resistance training, not running. It can be that, and just hear it as moving the body. And so what movement is, in many ways, from the day we were born, movement has been this tool for our brain to accurately perceive our body. Movement is essentially refreshing all of the sensory information that the brain is gathering through our whole body. And in that way, it is updating our brain about what's happening in our environment. What's the proper response at each moment? And how cool is that? How cool that movement, something so simple, something that we do all the time, something I'm doing right now, just more subtly, that is all serving my brain's digestion of what's happening. And we know the importance of perception, as in to perceive your environment accurately is a good thing, right? To be able to accurately assess your environment essentially means you have an accurate relationship with reality. And by accurate, I mean you genuinely know what's going on. You're not anticipating something that might happen. You're not filling in the blanks with a story. You're genuinely here. You're genuinely right now. And movement is one of the ways in which the brain digests the present moment. And not only that, so movement is it is one of the many tools that we can use to feel into our own sense of the body. I've used this demonstration before, but if you are seated right now, and you're you're sitting on your bum, it's pretty hard to tune into the butt cheeks, if you will, and get a sense of what's going on there, other than we feel the pressure of the chair up on our seat. If we were to maybe squeeze our butt cheeks, in many ways we become a lot more aware of that part of our body just by bringing movement there, just by bringing the engagement of our muscular system there. And so in that way, movement becomes a tool of self-exploration, of sensory exploration of our body. It's one thing to have a sense of okay, I know where my fingers are. I know that they're there. I can look at them and see them. But as I wiggle them and I feel their connection to my palms, and I feel that connection up into my wrists, and I feel that connection up into my elbow, thanks to movement, I'm now aware of much more, not just of myself, not just much more of myself, of my physical body, but I'm aware of the relationship of all these parts of me. And thus, I am getting this sense of being connected, of having one whole body to inhabit. And that brings me into my next point. For those of us who perhaps we want to get into movement because the way we're currently perceiving ourselves in our body, our relationship to ourselves in our body, maybe it's just not the best. Maybe it's pretty critical, or as in judgmental. Or perhaps there's just a lot of fear of not being able to take up space, or a belief that that's not for us. It's for others, but not for us. Movement is like a sacred ritual for self to be able to fully inhabit and take up space within this body. And the beautiful thing about the body, and I will never let this not be something that I greatly have reverence for, is the fact that our body reflects how we feel about ourselves. Our posture, our shape, all of it reflects how we feel about ourselves. And for, let's say, in my experience, I went through a season in my life, a long season of feeling too big, I needed to be smaller. And I would walk around with this essentially charade, this acting out of being smaller. And I would do this by pulling in my belly and kind of engaging my back. Oh, even to engage it now, it's just exhausting. But that is to say, how I felt about myself was reflected in how I presented myself. And I also had a season of being pretty dissociated and depressed. And that was also reflected in my posture, my breathing, and my overall rhythms had slowed way down, and my chest had collapsed. And the way my body was reflecting this was in my posture, in my shape. And so a lot of this is subconscious. We might have a conscious gotta pull the belly in, or gotta maybe hide the boobs for those of us who are taught to keep ourselves hidden. We might have a conscious sense of it, but overall it's a subconscious holding and not fully expressing what is real of us, And those postures are stinking exhausting because they're not authentic, and so they're not sustainable. And that is to say, when we invite truly conscious and intentional movement into our lives, we bring movement to some of these chronically held tension patterns that are more or less reflective of how we've been relating to ourselves. And we kind of get to challenge these tension patterns with movement. If you've been holding your belly in for a really long time because you're essentially charading into believing you're smaller than you really are because you need to feel that, well, what happens if you fully expand the belly? Like, there's a whole likelihood of a cascade to happen when you do that. Maybe some thoughts come up of like, oh, I feel gross, I feel yucky, I feel fat, I feel whatever. And that is to say that movement has induced an entire like physiologic, psychologic, and emotional response just from movement. If movement has the power to essentially surface what isn't normally thought about in that context, think about all that gets worked through when we choose to move regularly. And maybe if we induce a practice or invite a practice of regular, daily, just gentle movement, just kind of working through these chronic tension patterns, and they start to change, maybe that has effects within our relationship to ourselves. Maybe we start to relate to ourselves differently and therefore hold ourselves differently and therefore have a whole different sense of this life. If I view myself differently, if I feel somehow more empowered or more willing to take up space, imagine the things that I would feel more empowered to do during my day compared to what I used to feel I could and could not do. And if we start viewing the body as like a reflection of our nervous system and how we feel about ourselves, well, then it sort of becomes our responsibility as like a good inhabitor of this body to listen to what it's saying. And it speaks through tensions, right? It speaks through the language of tension and tone. And as a chiropractor, that's what I'm listening to when you're on the table, is the tension and tone of the system. Because I know that that doesn't just say what it says about your posture every day. Like it does say that, but then your posture says a lot more about how you feel about yourself and how you feel about your life. And so, utilizing movement to discover more about ourselves, not just in the physical sense, but in the emotional and psychologic and physiologic sense, we build a much deeper relationship with ourselves and our body. We kind of open the floodgates to living a life embodied because we recognize that this thing is very intelligent. This thing is always relaying to us information about what's happening. As we step along this path of truly embodying ourselves, truly inhabiting this system, what we come to find is like it will just teach us. It's going to teach us a lot. And movement is one of the ways in which we can stay connected to ourselves regularly. One final thing about movement, and I kind of had gotten into it previously, but think about movement as the medicine for keeping us in flow of life. Our whole body moves, even when we're not consciously making it move. Our breath is movement. Our eyes blinking is movement. The subtle twitching of our limbs, the blood pulsing through our veins and arteries. Movement is life. And so that is to say, life is always in this like ebbing and flowing, this rhythmic dance. And the more, I'll just say it, vitality, our quality of life essentially depends on how in tune we are with life. That is to say, are we dancing with life? Are we consciously participating with life? Or are we kind of just like feeling like life is just pounding us down? Sometimes it does feel like that, don't get me wrong. And life isn't out to get you. If that is your perception of life, look inward for that, you can use movement here. Like what posture is related to that perception that life is out to get you? Like how do you shape yourself? And can you bring movement to those areas? Just gentle movement. Because like I said earlier, movement sends fresh information up to the brain. If you move in areas that have felt chronically stuck, and you bring movement there that is just, gentle but conscious, you're allowing the brain an opportunity to reorganize its signals to that area. Because when we're engaging in a chronic pattern, that is because the brain is constantly wiring that pattern. It's constantly, let's say, firing through that pattern. Those neurologic signals are moving through that pattern. In order to change a chronic pattern, we have to change the brain's need for it. And by bringing movement to some of these areas, even if it feels like it's not moving, you're essentially giving the brain an opportunity to ask, do I really need this? Is this still serving me? In fact, sometimes that's enough to kind of pivot your attention in your life so that you can live a life that doesn't need that pattern, that doesn't need that chronic stability or inflexibility or even instability. And so that is to say, movement becomes this tool to traverse the landscape of our body. And our body is quite the teacher. It is quite the mirror for how we relate to ourselves and our environment. I feel like I've said that 15 times in this video because it's so true. And it's so important for us to regularly remember that. And if you feel like that doesn't resonate for you, if you feel like the body and you are completely different things, I invite you to really investigate whether or not that's true. Because I feel that the more willing we are to bridge this connection between body and self, the more it is that we traverse down this healing path. Because the body heals when it feels safe, when it feels supported, when it's fully inhabited. And if our body isn't healing, and that's why we feel like, oh, the body's out to get me, life's out to get me, and that's truly what we believe about all that is, it is that attitude and that relationship that's essentially going to continue to inhibit healing and evolving, because the body needs you. It needs your presence within it to feel at home, to feel safe. And that the body heals when it feels safe. The body heals when it senses that you're here. And if that's just not the way you relate to it right now, let's investigate why. And maybe movement can be one of the many tools that we utilize to make that relationship more harmonious and connected, and not just a cool idea, but truly an embodied experience. And so I hope this video felt helpful. It's a little all over the place, and I feel like there were some solid nuggets in it. And so if you yourself would like to integrate more movement into your life, start slow or gentle or easy. It really can just be a couple stretches in the morning. But if your breath and your awareness are with those movements, that is enough. That makes it an embodied experience. And that is what we're looking for when it comes to building a sustainable relationship with movement, a sustainable practice of it. So start small. Meet yourself where you're at, if you will. And don't shy away just because you think it needs to look like something that just isn't sustainable or reachable right now.